everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Let's Focus on the MENA region. During the previous episodes, we have been discussing several countries from the region, namely Morocco, Tunisia, but also Lebanon. Today, we will be focusing on Syria. As you know, the war in Syria entered its 12th year, and on this occasion, we have decided to invite a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Lukas Mandl. Mr. Lukas Mandl is member of the European Parliament from Austria since 2017. He is also vice chair of the subcommittee on security and defense, but he is also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, where he is shadow rapporteur on Syria. Mr. Mandl, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite.
Syria has entered its 12th year since the war started, and it's far from being, let's say, safe and stable country. There have been reported since the beginning of the year hostilities in the northeast, violence in the south, ISIL carrying attacks throughout the country. Nevertheless, you decided to travel to Syria in March of this year. Can you tell us a little bit more about this trip? And especially about your impressions and what would be the main and key takeaways?
Well, if I can go to personal impressions, the one is very irritating and also depressing about the devastation also in Damascus and the wider region around Damascus, the capital, where there is still so much damage. There are mines around and houses, buildings are not rebuilt due to these mines and also due to lack of money, of course, of the people whose property these houses are. So you can really clearly see with your own eyes what war does to people, does to a society, and does to infrastructure. Proper dwelling is not really possible in Syria. And of course, another personal impression is the one of the cultural heritage. It's clear that Syria and Damascus, but also other parts of Syria, are really a treasure of cultural heritage of our planet and of the world. And this is the overall impression when it comes to my mind. When it comes to the political approach, I see that humanitarian aid is essential, of course, and the EU is, as in other parts of the world, the largest donor, has been the largest donor, has quite recently decided in the EU-Syria conference in Brussels to again spend more than 6 billion for Syria in terms of humanitarian aid. But this is not everything, and this is the reason why I took the chance to talk to UN personnel, to people from International Red Cross, for example, to students as well, to visit also social projects in many different areas, from education to workforce to health, etc., and also sites where war has taken place or war crimes were also committed in the past.
I would like to ask you another question related to the EU. Some people would say, especially now that war has returned to Europe with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, that Syria hasn't been anymore the priority, not only since the beginning of this year, but already for quite some time. It's not anymore the priority for the EU, nor it's not put anymore high on the EU's agenda. Do you think this is true? Because if I'm not mistaken, the last resolution, for instance, in the European Parliament dates back to March 2021. Are there any plans to put it back very soon on the agenda? But also on the EU's agenda, not only in the European Parliament's agenda, but in general?
I would say there is a risk that Syria disappears from the priority lists, more or less. And this risk is real, and it's really a risk because Syria is important for us. Syria is important for all Europeans as well. Looking on the map, we can clearly understand that the geographical state of Syria is important. Syria is an important part of the Middle East. The Middle East is an extremely important region for Europe, then there are many Syrians around in the European Union and close to the European Union in our neighborhood due to the migration crisis. In the past, many Syrians want to go back. Experts tell that 75% of Syrian refugees all over the world would intend to go back, but are afraid to really do so because of tensions which are still extremely present in daily life in Syria because of fear of violence and so on. And this is also a part of the reasons why Syria is so important for us. So I guess we have to put it on the agenda. We are living in times when, of course, the war committed by the Kremlin is top priority on each and every agenda, but we have to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture clearly shows us that things are interconnected, and Syria is extremely interconnected with this area. When it comes to the European Parliament, I'm happy that we have figured out with the rapporteur of the European Parliament, I'm serving there as a shadow rapporteur on Syria, that there will be a Syria report of the European Parliament. At least our intention is to negotiate one and to present the public with a Syria report of the European Parliament. And this should also push EU forward to remain with Syria as a priority. And the before mentioned recent EU-Syria conference in Brussels, again raising more than 6 billion money for Syria, is a clear signal that there is still something ongoing. But it's not only about humanitarian aid, as already mentioned, it's also about, I would say, future perspectives, especially for young people in Syria, which who don't really see many perspectives for the future, because their opportunities are very limited in terms of education, in terms of studies, in terms of work as well, in terms of traveling. So there is really a generation that must not be lost, I would say. Or just to provide you with one figure, there are 2.5 million children in Syria without schooling. So just imagine what that means. In 10 or 20 years, there will again be a generation, maybe even not alphabetized at all, and maybe again ready for violence and crime. And this is something mankind, humanity, I would say, has to avoid and has to do its utmost to avoid such a scenario in order, by the way, to provide future perspectives.
You mentioned the Donors Conference, which took place on 9th and 10th of May. And I would like just to ask you something related to this, because it's true that Europe has been the largest donor when it comes to assistance, humanitarian and resilience assistance to Syria. However, do you think that we are doing enough, especially when it comes to political level?
No. I guess we can do more and we should do more. Especially the field of education seems to be of utmost importance to me, not only for children, also for children, but also for young people, for students or people who want to do university studies. And this requires a lot of preconditions, especially when it comes to the tensions between different ethnic groups, religious groups in the country, war opponents from the past or even from the present. We also maybe understand better than ever before what the Kremlin influence means in the country, and there is a lot of Kremlin influence in Syria. There is also ongoing proliferation with weapons used by terrorist organizations like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which are exported, so to speak, from Iran illegally, of course, through Syria to Lebanon. At least this is our suspicion. And it's pretty relevant that we confront the different geopolitical players with these issues, and that we meet the challenges which we have to solve in order to avoid violence and terrorism and this stuff for the future, which have really harmed and contaminated the past. When it comes to the political sphere, I would also say we have to closely listen to the experts from international organizations, of course the United Nations, but also the Red Cross and other humanitarian organizations which would be reliable. I count them as the most reliable partners, and what they ask for and what they recommend is more exceptions for humanitarian aid. That's important. Exceptions from the sanctions which are in place for very clear reasons, and they're important because the regime is a criminal regime, and we don't seek contact with it. But exceptions for humanitarian aid and for what kind of humanitarian aid, this is also an important part. It's the kind of humanitarian aid that supports the local level, small entities, small and middle-sized enterprises, in order not to contribute to corruption. Because if the international community, if EU and other international bodies support large entities, we may be part of the contribution to an awful system of corruption, which harms confidence as everywhere in the world, and which leads to more trouble in the future. This is why this focus on the local level seems to be of utmost importance.
You mentioned the perspectives for a better future, especially when it comes to youth. And we all know that so many crimes have been committed in Syria, especially with the use of chemical weapons. So many people have disappeared, and relatives don't even know where these people are. I want to ask you something on how do you see the future of Syria, and especially on 2 points. When it comes to reconciliation, is it possible? Is it possible, especially that we know that Assad is still there? And reconstructions, and how should the EU contribute?
Actually, I would say reconciliation is not easily possible under that regime. And it's also due to tensions within the society a very far way to go. But the way is important, and the way has to be gone, and we should contribute to it. Just imagine when I visited one village close to Damaskus, a few kilometers away from the capital, I was talking to a representative of the Christian minority in that case, and he told me a lot about crimes against freedom of belief, freedom of religion, against the Christians there as a minority. And he was also sharing with me the view that it would be impossible for these parts of this village and of the wider region to talk to each other when the people came before the war or during the war from different sides. And this is, of course, something that's absolutely understandable personally, but it doesn't provide a really optimistic outlook for the future, because it's important in each and every society to talk to each other. And this is, I guess, something we have to share all the time with people involved on that side or the other side, in order to find ways to talk to each other, at least for the next generation. The children from this side and the children from other side, they do not have that much of trouble with each other. It was just a generation before, and maybe we can provide a good example, a good picture, and can provide the path and way to talk to each other, and this would be a way to reconciliation. After all, as mentioned in the beginning, Syria is a country of enormous cultural heritage, which is part of the pressure of humanity, of the treasure, I want to say, and Syria is also for that reason a traditional country of understanding between different cultures and ethnicities. So if this regime can be overcome, many things are possible in this society, because the society has ancient history and great tradition. And maybe a last point I want to make when it comes to the regime is, at least for me, myself, the lesson from this Kremlin attack against Ukraine, from committing war crimes by the Kremlin, is that in the future we must not allow any more nationalism, hate ideology, and let's say so-called arguments which are not based on evidence but based on hate against other groups. We must not allow it anymore to be put on the negotiation tables of this planet, because it's not reliable. And as we can see, if a government, a regime is not democratically legitimized, as the one in Kremlin is not legitimized, as the one in Syria is not legitimized, the sooner or the later this regime will also commit crimes or at least be violent against the own people or against the rest of the world, or both, as we experience it now by the Kremlin. And this is one more reason why we should really tackle the issue as soon as possible and very high on the priority list, because it's important for Europe and the whole world.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel, for your time.
Thank you for your interest.
Thank you everyone for watching this new episode of Let's Focus on the MENA region, and see you very soon for the next one.